passion. And I'm very excited for today's global read. It's our second of the year, and it's with Valarie Kaur, See No Stranger. And as many of you who come regularly to these global reads, you know that they happen each month. And next month, we'll be talking about that after Valarie. And our moderator for today, Gard Jameson, will have an opportunity to share some questions among themselves. And then everyone is invited throughout the time of the global read to please, any reflections that you might have or questions, put them either in the chat box or the question and answer box. And there's a little note here, a quotation from Parker Palmer, who is one of my contemporaries. And he talks about Valarie's book as a book that will change your life. And I think that you'll find that that is absolutely true. And evidence will present itself today in helping you see how important Valarie's work is. And to usher us through the conversation today is one of our board members, Gard Jameson. And Gard is in Las Vegas. He is a man of many talents. He teaches at the University of Las Vegas, and by way of philosophy, contemporary and comparative religion topics. And he has a wonderful interest in the religions of Asia. And so I'm going to present Gard now and ask him if he would take over from this point. Thank you, Gard. And I'll stop sharing the screen.
Okay, and I'm gonna make sure. Okay, so I
think you're okay.
Technology, lots of technology. So Marilyn, thank you so much, and welcome to all of you to this incredible global read with Valarie Kaur. I first saw Valarie at the Parliament of World Religions, and her talk was literally electrifying to all of us in the audience. She is a renowned civil rights leader, a lawyer, an author, filmmaker, and educator. She leads the Revolutionary Love Project to reclaim love as the primal force for justice. In the wake of 2016 election, Valarie posed this question: is this the darkness of the tomb or the darkness of the womb? Reframing that moment. In the last 20 years, Valarie has worked for and won policy change on multiple fronts: hate crimes, racial profiling, immigration, detention, solitary confinement, internet freedom, and a lot more. She's an advocate at the intersection of spirituality, storytelling, and justice. She earned her degrees from Stanford, Harvard, and Yale Law School, and her debut book, See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love, builds upon, and I encourage you to watch, her wonderful TED Talk. Valarie declares that revolutionary love is the call of our time, a radical, joyful practice that extends in three directions: to others, to our opponents, and to ourselves. It enjoins us to see no stranger, but instead look at others and say, you are a part of me I do not yet know. Starting from that place of wonder and curiosity, the world begins to change. It is a practice that can transform a relationship, a community, a culture, and even the entire planet. Valarie, I want to welcome you, and I want to share again that you and I share some common threads. You and I spent intense time in White Plaza at Stanford University protesting two wars, I the Vietnam War and you the Iraq War. You and I graduated from Stanford with a degree in religious studies, which at Stanford, as you know, is a fairly unusual degree. And you and I share a deep friendship with our mutual friend, Victor Kazanjian, former director of the United Religious Initiative, and Diana Eck, the head of the Pluralism Project at Harvard. Valarie, your book, See No Stranger, is truly inspirational. I loved every page, and I was truly inspired by it all. I want to thank you for writing it, and I want to ask you if you could now share your why in writing See No Stranger.
Guard, thank you so much. First of all, it's really nourishing for me to be in community with you, especially this morning. I'm coming out of COVID. I can still feel it in my body. Through wild circumstances, I was separated from my children while we got it. So they got it, and then we got it, and I wasn't able to be with them. And then in the midst of all of that, my beloved Shadi, my dog of 10 years, who was by my side while I was writing See No Stranger, died suddenly while I was not at home. And so um, grief and sickness and separation have been happening for me all at the same time. And it occurred to me that I've been just the last few weeks, and it occurred to me that I'm touching what I think might be the epicenter of what, the world, all of you, so many of us have been surviving. So just the fact of gathering in the midst of this is a testament, I think, to our resilience and our courage. And this goes into why I wrote the book. It was truly from my own survival. I didn't know the ingredients for resilience and courage. I, became an activist when I was 20 in the wake of 9/11, when hate violence just was exploding against my community. A man from my community was killed, and for years after that, 15, 16 years, all I knew how to do was push, 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 just grind my bones to the ground, thinking that's how I could be enough, and of course it was never enough. And then at the onset of the 2016 election season, when my son was just born, that's when I had my existential crisis. Like I came home from the airports on the day of the Muslim ban, trying to help as a lawyer, and I just, collapsed and could barely hold my son. And I realized, like, oh, I'm not going to last. I'm not going to last. And that's when my husband said, okay, we made the radical decision to spend a year in the rainforest in Central America. And it was like taking the first deep breath that I had taken my whole life. And it was the wisdom of the midwife that came to me. She doesn't say, all right, my love, breathe, and then push, 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 push. No, she says, breathe, my love, and then push, and then breathe again. There's a kind of cadence, a rhythm to sustain longevity in any long labor. And it was in that space where, it felt like the womb of the earth, where I could really breathe, that I began to reflect on the ancestral wisdom that was able to sustain people, especially people of color, my ancestors and those on the soil, to, survive ongoing injustice, to grow old, to have the ability to raise their children and teach them how to be brave too. And so that was the construction of the book. That's how I began to write the book, and ultimately develop this compass that I call a compass for revolutionary love: how to see no stranger, how to tend the wound, how to breathe and push so that you can last. So I wrote it for my own survival. And my hope now is that I can put it in your hands, that it might be medicine for you too.
Well, you did put it in our hands, and it is a manifesto. And I want to ask you a question. In the book, you talk a lot about rage. And I grew up in a family, and I think you did too, where rage was not spoken of, it was suppressed. And I teach Indian philosophy, and again, rage is just energy. And the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh, and Daniel Goleman have written books on negative emotions, and they've talked about the toxicity of anger and rage. And I was curious, could you share with us how rage has informed your journey and how it's been an asset in the work that you do?
It was my mother
Mm.
who taught me how that energy of rage that I had suppressed inside of me my whole life, how it was also the vehicle for our power and agency. I I remember, like many women, I'm a survivor of sexual assault, and when I broke my silence in my own extended family, it was my mother who stood between me and the rest of the room and said, "No, not my daughter, she will be free," when they wanted me to quiet my voice. And there was fury in her eyes. Like, God, I had never seen that much anger roar in my mother before. And she was teaching me that I was worth protecting, that I was worth fighting for, and that I could access that energy in myself to be able to fight for myself. And that truly unlocked the beginning of my long journey of healing in my body around that act of violence. And I think about how many of us, women and girls especially, have been taught to suppress our rage in the name of love or forgiveness. And then how many men are conditioned to let their rage explode as a sign of their strength. But the solution I've learned is neither. It's to process your rage in safe containers like our ancestors did. It's the beating and the drumming and the dancing and the wailing and the screaming, right? Those practices to become intimate with the most powerful energies inside of us without shame and without harm to others or ourselves, to have spaces to do that, like my mother did ultimately for me. And then to decide, okay, once my rage is on the outside of me, how do I wish to be in relationship with this rage? What information does my rage carry? And how do I want to harness this energy for what I do in the world, the creative, nonviolent work that I do in the world? I call that harnessed energy divine rage. The aim of divine rage is not vengeance. The aim of divine rage is to reorder the world. And I think that we as people of faith can just look a little bit more closely into our scriptures to find those instances of divine rage. It's the rage in Jesus's eyes when he pushed over the tables of the moneylenders in the temple. It's the rage in the eyes of the first woman warrior, Mai Pago, when she leads, soldiers into battle to fight the oppression of empire. Those instances, I think, can empower us now. We can ask ourselves, especially when we're in the face of white supremacy and patriarchy and the climate crisis, how do I want to dance with my rage? The way that Audre Lorde invites us to listen to my rage as a symphony, and it becomes a kind of dance, to process that rage in raw containers, and then to let yourself decide what action that leads you to.
Beautiful. I think you can see Shiva behind me, who is dancing. He is the god of rage.
Yes.
And again, what we learn from India is that bliss is our birthright, and that we've been swindled. And, for me, a lot of the experience or the journey has been the dance between grief and deep sorrow and tears and that rage. Can you speak to that dance between grief and rage?
Oh, I think it happens when we realize that what we are most undone by, what we most weep for, ought not be. That it's institutions of power led by people who are enacting and repeating patterns of violence, oppression, and hierarchy that continue to wield their damage in our lives. When Bobir Uncle was killed after 9/11, Bobir Singh Sodhi, the first person killed of dozens and ultimately hundreds of thousands of people in the way that our nation responded to 9/11. And the hate violence and the state violence and the 2 decades of war, he was the first to be killed by a man who called himself a patriot in Arizona. And his death, his murder, it wasn't just the gunmen who took his life. It was a culture. It was a government that continued to hold up a picture of who was our nation's new enemy and enact policies that targeted our communities again and again, year after year. So once you see that the source of your grief is something that ought not to be, then you tap into that rage. And then it's like, how do I work with this energy? And then what is the divine rage that might keep me in the long, long labor against those opponents?
It's beautiful. Yeah, last night I was teaching Chinese philosophy, and we were talking about Confucius and the Golden Rule. And I said, this rule's been around for 2,500 years. How many of you are against it? If you are, don't raise your hand. See me after class. But why in 2,500 years, right? Since the end of World War II, 115 recorded wars, and most of the casualties civilians. As you say, it brings you to tears, and it brings you to advocacy. And so I'm hoping that your voice will inspire many to get out of their stupor, to get out of their paralysis, and to show up and be present.
Well, Gard, may I speak to that?
Yeah.
I believe that we can look back on human history and observe the first great leap in human consciousness, which is what our dear Karen Armstrong has defined as the axial age, right? It's Confucius, it's Buddha, it's Jesus, and all the way down to Nanak, who declared that we could shift our understanding of who counted as us from a tribal understanding to a shared we. And those declarations of love, you know, Jesus to love thy neighbor, and Abraham to open our tent to all, and Muhammad to take in the orphan, or Buddha unending compassion, or Mirabai to love without limit, or Guru Nanak to see no stranger. They were all declarations of love, and we've heard them. We've heard them come down for thousands of years, whether we're part of a tradition or not. You know, when did you first encounter that call to love without limit? I believe we're in the midst of a second great transition, a second great awakening in human consciousness, that this is our moment to put that call to love into embodied practice in a way that we've never done before, at a scale we haven't done before, to structure our society itself. Imagine still every society is constructed on this hierarchy of human value, and that love ethic is inherently disruptive and allows us to reimagine our spaces. So if the first great awakening was about awakening to a call of love, then I think that the second one is around how to build and embody the beloved community. And truly the stake of, you know, the stakes have never been higher. It's the future of the human race, of democracy, of this earth being habitable to us. And so my work now, I've spent the last 20 years organizing around hate. I have made a promise to spend the next 20 years to organize around love. And the work of the Revolutionary Love Project is so deeply aligned with the work for the Charter of Compassion, is to equip people with the practical tools to build beloved community where they are as an internal and collective practice.
Yes, and we share an appreciation of Parker Palmer and his work. And really, it's about creating trust, circles of trust, in which inconvenient conversations can take place. Can you speak to, you know, the kind of polarization that we're seeing now? There's been this split between, you know, white people and all other people. And even that is a kind of us versus them conversation. And how does revolutionary love sort of bridge the gap in those binaries, in those dichotomies?
I'll answer by way of a story. I don't think we saw greater polarization and the danger of it than what we saw on January 6th of 2021. My brother-in-law was trapped in the Capitol building during the insurrection. And so we were in the office so the children wouldn't see us, watching the screen, on the phone with his mother and sister and wife, crying. And he was telling us he was okay, but we could see the people breaking down the doors and shattering the glass and storming in, and with the Confederate flags in the arms. And we knew that he wasn't just a reporter for CNN, that he was a brown man too. So what would they do if they found him? He was shuttled to safety, and only then did I become aware of my body, that I'm like, oh, this is terror. And this terror is familiar. How many times in my life have I seen people I love in the face of white supremacist violence and been unable to protect them? And I realized that this violence was just, you know, what were they doing? They were trying to stop the peaceful transfer of power to a body of leadership who would see me and my family as part of this country. It was only a matter of time, as the nation became more and more multiracial, that white nationalist violence would become cannibalistic and attack the very seat of power that gave it legitimacy. So here I'm feeling all these things. I'm feeling my rage, right? I'm crying, I'm sobbing, and my fists are clenched. And I felt hate, you know, I felt this hate for those people. And then I got a phone call from my dear friend. You know, I just met with her this morning. She helped build the Revolutionary Love Project with me. And she said, I'm so sorry, you know. I said, I know. She's like, no, my parents were at the Capitol. I said, oh, are they okay? She's like, no, you don't understand. They were on the outside of the building. So my brother-in-law's on the inside and her parents are on the outside. And Dr. King's declaration that we are tied together in a single garment of human destiny, that just became so real. And I realized that as much as I wanted to hate those people, as much as I wanted to see them as monsters, I had to see them through the eyes of their daughter, who saw them as deeply wounded, deeply misinformed, whose racial biases were legitimized all the way up to the presidency. That didn't make them any less dangerous, but it did make it possible to see their wound. And it might not be my role to tend to that wound, but it might be hers.
Mhm.
It might be hers. And this is where Parker Palmer has looked at this revolutionary love compass and called it the new nonviolence, because it makes space for the grief and the rage, and it makes sense for loving it makes space for loving ourselves, and it makes space for the idea that everyone has a different role in the labor. And
Mhm.
so for many of us, the question is, what is my role? And I think those who identify as white have an immense role that others cannot play, that perhaps I could not play. To sit down with relatives and cousins and neighbors and students and loved ones and to be able to listen to them.
Mhm.
Because if you're not listening to them, if you're not in relationship with them, if you're not talking to them, who is?
Mhm.
And the only way we're going to transition our nation into a truly multiracial democracy where white people will become a minority in this country with grace and with beauty is if we have those allies to be accomplices with people of color and be able to help all of those and their networks to say, oh, there's a place for me too in this vision of America. I don't have to feel afraid. I can let myself embrace.
Yeah, fear seems to be the great limiting factor in all of our experience. And also trauma. I'm taking a course with Thomas Hubble, personal, collective, and intergenerational or genetic trauma. I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface of how traumatized everyone is, the people on the outside of the Capitol and the people on the inside of the Capitol. And when we can hear that trauma, perhaps we can have a real discourse, a real conversation. Somebody is asking, how does one become involved practically in this revolutionary love movement?
Well, I have to tell you in honesty, when I began this work, I was like, I'm not building a movement. I am I'm just seeding some ideas, and then it's happened organically, Guard. In the last half a year since we released our learning hub, people have taken the compass and self-organized around the ideas inside of their communities. So we have a K through 8 school where the teachers have all read the book and are implementing those exercises with their kids. We have houses of worship, especially Christian churches have come to me and says, it says love thy neighbor in my scriptures, but how do I operationalize this? And so they're doing sermon series around the 10 core practices and then service projects in that spirit. And an advocacy organization in Arizona have been putting up the compass and the excerpts on their walls and gathering to say, we don't want to become what we're fighting against. How do we make sure that we preserve our humanity by preserving theirs, even when we're engaging in this political fight? So wherever you are, whatever institution you're a part of, even your own home, I believe that, as Bell Hooks said, that the love ethic can be the foundation of every arena of public life. And we're just getting started. And then we just had a strategic planning process with my team this morning. This whole year is going to be like, all right, how do we help you? How do we help people seed these beloved communities around the country? So for so many, you're already doing it. So how do we strengthen it? How do we give you even more tools and shared vocabulary to deepen it? And then how do we spread it? So to join us, you go to seenostranger.com. You'll see the Learning Hub. We're building community on social media on Instagram, so you can follow my account or the Revolutionary Love account. And I'm really excited about going on this journey, especially with the Charter for Compassion community, because it's just basically giving you an extra toolkit for the work that you're already deeply, deeply committed to.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful. So everybody get the book and go to the website and recognize that there are some exercises and tools. And again, it's a daily practice, isn't it, Valarie? It's really a contemplative practice. And in my own experience, you've got to have a daily practice, just like brushing your teeth, that you would engage in loving kindness meditation, journaling, following your dreams. The dreams are giving us a lot of information these days. So I have a friend whose son, Jesse Lewis, was killed at Sandy Hook.
Mm.
And she is really appealing to the early generations. And Dwight Eisenhower once said, if you want to solve the problem of segregation, you've got to begin in kindergarten.
Mm.
So are you focusing on the little ones as you do this work? Yeah.
I just got a lump in my throat around the naming of Sandy Hook, because a few months before Sandy Hook, the Sikh community survived the biggest massacre we have on the soil in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. So on the day of Sandy Hook, I was literally flying from Oak Creek to Connecticut, to Hartford, to get down to New Haven where I was at school.
Mhm.
When we landed, we got the news of Newtown, and so my husband and I drove to Sandy Hook to pray and be with the people, with the communities in the church. And I just remember the tears, and I thought we have literally flown from one mass shooting to another. And just as we saw so many Christians sit with us at the memorial and cry with us as a Sikh community, we wanted to show up for our
Yeah.
Christian brothers and sisters in Newtown in that church and weep with them. And it was deeply powerful. I keep thinking people who grieve together then organize together. And
Yeah,
um,
yeah. Riane Eisler says it's about collaboration and partnerships. We need to move away from systems of domination. And I
yes,
don't know if you know any of those folks. Scarlett Lewis, do you know her?
I don't.
I'd love to put her in touch with your team because I think again, I think Riane is correct. We need to bring our energies together. We need to collaborate, and that will eventually erode the domination systems that are now in place. So thank you for your immediate response. And what happened in Oak Creek, I have a friend, Ralph Singh, who was there and was
Yes.
involved. And what a tragedy. And yet here is a tradition, Guru Nanak, who was attempting to bring Hindus and Muslims together around the idea of revolutionary love.
Guard, here's the secret. That my work is just a beautiful, messy attempt to reclaim Nanak's message for a new age.
Yeah. When you disappeared in the jungles of Central America, he disappeared in a river.
That's right. I didn't think of it as that's, he only disappeared for 3 days. I had to
I
disappear
know.
for a year.
It takes us longer. So yeah, so this may be an incredible moment. I'm a paleontologist, and 67 million years ago, there was a meteor the size of Manhattan that hit the planet, and it provided the gateway for the mammalian species.
Mm,
And I regard the coronavirus as a meteor from within the Earth. The Earth is speaking to us,
mm,
and it is clearing the way
mm.
for a new level of awareness. And we're just the pioneers in this moment. We'll bear some seeds, but you know, if I'm somebody listening to you right now, tell me something really practical that I can just go out and do today.
It actually answers your previous question about how we engaged our young ones, because the practice is so simple.
Yeah.
Um, and it's Guru Nanak's call to see no stranger. When I walk down the street, even with the masks, and I see people's faces on the street, on the screen, on the subway, I think to myself, okay, brother, sister, sibling, beloved, and sometimes I will say, because this is the truth, right? You are a part of me I do not yet know. You are a part of me I do not yet know. And when I train my eye in that way, I am priming myself to see those who I would see as them as part of us, as part of me. And that simple act of retraining one's eye, retraining one's consciousness, shapes everything, because how we see determines what we do. You know, who we stand up for when we see a fight on the street, or where we sit on the bus, or where we send our kids to school, or who we promote, or what policies we support, or what leaders we elect. It shapes everything. And we know that demagogues win when they're able to demonize entire groups of people and we just let them. And so what if we could expand our sight the way our ancients have asked us to do, to be able to see all others as kin? And how can we do this with young people from the start? So my daughter's 3, and we take our walks to the beach, and I'm like, what is revolutionary love for her? And one secret is that a children's book will be coming out within a year or so, and this is the first verse. Are you ready? We
Yes.
sing the song. Okay. Ants on a leaf, birds in the sky, sweet little bee, tree so high. Wonder baby says, wow, whoa, you're a part of me I don't yet know.
Mm. Beautiful.
And then it
Yeah,
goes on from the earth to the animals to other people to even people we might not like, feel afraid of, to ourselves, and a way of seeing, a way of being that our young people, our children already know. They just get it. So how do we encourage them to keep seeing and being that way and then retrain ourselves to do it with them?
exactly. Well, during COVID, I wrote a children's book, so I want to trade children's books with you.
Yes,
Mine is
please.
called Love is the Magic Key, and it's about a father and a daughter who kind of wander around, and the father says, in order to have it, you have to give it away. And she starts to tear up. She says, I don't want to give it away. And then he starts to show her ways in which people are giving away love. And she says, I get it, Dad. And
Oh,
so fantastic. And again, it starts with the children. I always used to say, and I'm sure you experience the same thing, they are my teachers, right? Your children, 3 years old, they're our teachers.
they
They're giving us the practices.
are. Sometimes in ways they don't expect. I mean, my son and his tantrums really taught me a lot about rage. And first I was really guilty about feeling so angry with him. Why doesn't he just brush his teeth? I realized like, oh, my rage doesn't mean I'm a bad mother. It's like rage is part of my laboring for him. I want him to be healthy and safe. So it did teach me a lot around the compass. And that's what's so lovely about the compass, is that we developed it for the work out in the world, but it has ended up being how I orient to my most intimate relationships. And I define love like love is sweet labor. Love is not just a rush of feeling. Love is sweet labor. It's fierce and bloody, imperfect, life-giving. It's a choice we make. And if love is labor, then it harnesses the whole range of human emotions. Joy is the gift of love. Grief is the price of love. Anger is the force that protects that which we love. And when we think we've reached our limit, then to wonder about another is what returns us to love.
Beautiful, beautiful. So well said and so beautifully articulated in your book. And, I'm curious, we have such a large portion, bigger than I ever anticipated, of the population who don't want to listen,
Mm.
who really don't care. And they're on both sides. I live in Las Vegas. I have a lot of people who I'm in relationship with who live in their beautiful mansions, and they're very well to do, and they basically don't feel like they have any obligation or any connection to what's going on right now. And what do you say to folks like that who just sort of have, that the word sincere means without wax in your ears? and, and how do we get the wax out of the ears? What's your recommendation there?
Separateness is an illusion, right? So the idea that we could just retreat into whatever privilege we have
Yeah,
and be safe
yeah,
is an
yeah,
illusion, right? And I can see how it's never been more challenging to reach people who don't wish to listen, because now we have entire worlds constructed by the social media algorithms that allow us to inhabit narratively cohesive but diametrically opposed realities. That has never been before. So to, I often, I'm in the social justice movements and I see my progressive folks, and when I see the hardening to listen, the willingness to write off entire swaths of people, and I know where it's coming from, like deep trauma and deep rage and rightful, often righteous rage, right? And then I see on the other side a refusal to wonder or imagine about the suffering in which so many of us are fighting. You can see how the refusal to listen and then inhabit these narrative realities on our screens every day has deepened the schisms between us in ways that we have never seen in this country before. And so whether we will teeter on the brink of civil war in the coming decades, a kind of civil war, constant power struggle, or birth a new nation that has never been, a multiracial, multi-faith nation, a nation made up of other nations, has never been on the face of the planet. So the dramatic stakes are so high. And off, yes, we need the policy proposals and the big fights in Congress, but truly for the deep culture change to happen, it's in the space between you and me.
Mhm.
It's in the willingness to reach out to those friends in Las Vegas and sit at their dinner tables or invite them to your kitchen table and begin not with an opinion, but begin with story. And when we begin with story, when we lead with story, with our own lived experience, then it can begin to puncture that narrative reality that we've wrapped around ourselves. And if there are enough punctures, right, that
Yeah,
might open someone to a process of transformation that indeed takes time.
beautiful. Yeah, it's leading by example. I remember going to a Hanukkah dinner and there were some rabbis there, and we walked in and they said, "We know how we feel about killing Palestinians. How do you feel?" It was like, as I said, the rage and the grief, the sadness was just so immense.
Mm,
And I just, there was such a hole in my heart.
mm,
And then I remembered my friend, Emma Sapala over at Stanford, who teaches the happiness class.
mm,
She spoke of a student who was goth, you know, dressed to the nines in black and stay away. Anyway, she taught about the mirror neurons, and maybe this could be a big part of it. But when we smile at one another, when we engage in sincere and honest discourse with a smile, perhaps there's a way of, as you say, puncturing those holes and opening something up. Anyway, this student, she would smile at this goth lady, and for 2 weeks, the goth lady just gave her the scowl. And then at one moment, walking down the hallway, she smiled, and the goth lady came up. She said, "I want to thank you for seeing me."
mm,
And maybe this is, just a small way or a small story, but it's a very powerful conclusion that I think a lot of people don't feel seen, and as a result are very angry. You want to share any thoughts about that?
mm. It strikes me as deeply true in the small and in the large ways. I remember being a legal observer at Guantanamo and feeling so much anger for the soldiers who went about their lives on the base as if it was normal to torture and detain people over the hill. And there, there's an Irish pub at Guantanamo, and I remember sitting there and just journaling to try to capture all what I was feeling. And a soldier plopped in front of me, and he's like, "I see you. I see what you're writing in your book." In other words, like, "I see you judging us." And then he launches into this tirade that the prisoners get more freedom than we do. The world doesn't see what I see. We're the real prisoners here. And I just felt like all the rage just wanted me to leave or shake him. and it was a conscious act. It was like an effortful act. With every ounce in me, I had to wonder why, right? Can I see the man in front of me, the soldier, this like one-dimensional caricature? Can I wonder why? And I ask him, "Okay, why?" and then it happened, guard. Like, this soldier just melted into this 18-year-old kid who could have been my little brother. As he was telling me his story about trying to find meaning and purpose after 9/11, trying to serve your country, seeing his fellow soldiers killed, having to justify why he's there, why he's not there. And I could see him struggling to make sense of it. And here's the thing about listening. The goal of listening is not necessarily to change the other person or to legitimize them or compromise with them. It's the goal of listening is to understand them. And that deep understanding, if you're really driven by that deep understanding, then that person might begin to wonder about you too, might want to hear your story. And that's when, deep listening is an act of surrender. You risk being changed by what you hear. And so when that mirroring happens, as you've described, then the magic has occurred, which we don't see represented in our public life at all. It's just two heads screaming at each other. But if we can engage in that deep seeing of each other and allow ourselves to be undone by each other, then that that is the deeper cultural transformation in the small, the crevices of our culture that could change the whole. In that moment, you know, I wasn't able to stay with this person long enough for him to wonder about me. But that was okay because I came back with an understanding that was essential for me. And I tell the story in the book. When I came back, I realized that prisoners were being held in conditions of solitary confinement in the Supermax prison down the road from my house, in conditions that rivaled what we saw in Guantanamo. And we embarked on a year-long investigation of that prison. And the soldier in Guantanamo haunted me in the best way, because I realized I couldn't just focus on the prisoners. I had to wonder about the correctional officers too. And we created a film that lifted up their stories and their harm as well. And I am proud to say, Gard, after the book was published, it's been 10 years now, Northern Correctional Facility has been officially shut down and will be dismantled in the state of Connecticut. And if we can do it there, we can do it everywhere. And we did it by seeing the full humanity of everyone in the picture.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of people don't appreciate is when you smile, you may not necessarily get that other person to smile, but you've released some facial muscles. So the next person that smiles at them may get them to smile. So our efforts, you know, never go without consequence. I want to ask you, you know, Einstein said, you know, really smart guy. He said, the most important question of all questions is, do we live in a friendly universe? Do you believe that we live in a friendly universe, that there's a moral arc to history, as Dr. King said?
I wrestle with King. I love King. He is my ancestor and guide, and I wrestle with him. For a long time, I took that arc as comfort, and I often saw it as like a linear arc. and it's only now that I, you know, after just being in it for some time, and this the last 5 years, that I've embraced a different way to view history, that the story of America is one long labor, a series of contractions and expansions, and that we are the midwives, like, as well as the body in labor. And every cycle returns us to a trauma that feels like what we have previously experienced, like the George Floyd murders here in LA. All the unrest felt like 92, and they felt like 1968, and they felt like, you know, and so just like Oak Creek felt like 9/11, and Indianapolis felt like Oak Creek. It's just we keep returning to the trauma, but like the body in labor, every turn through the cycle, we gain a little bit more space and knowledge, you know, a little bit more expansiveness around solidarity and dignity and courage. And so here's the thing. I don't know how many more turns through the cycle it's going to take before we birth an America that is safe and free, before we birth an earth that is habitable for generations to come. I know that I want to show up when it's my turn in the cycle. And the best way I have found to show up is if love is my compass.
Yeah. And, you know, with the 10 gurus, each one of them showed up, just as you said. And with your wonderful story of the warrior princess, she showed up just as you said. But we continue to show up. And I'm married to an OBGYN, and so I hear stories of birthing every day.
Yes, it's a useful metaphor.
And gestation is a really important metaphor.
Yeah.
So, you know, it could be that we're not crowning quite yet, but
right.
We're still in gestation, and there's still a lot of movement in the womb, and those are all movements of growth. And so, again, I take solace in the idea that we do live in a friendly universe, and that ultimately the good will win, as Gandhi said. Love will win, but that it is a fight. It is a process. So, you know, you inspire all of us who are listening to you today to continue this good fight. What did John Lewis say? A little good trouble. Let's get into a little good trouble. So, you know, I had a nephew who was cordoned off by the police after the George Floyd murder. and he was accused of a felony because he had a baton in his hand, and it was the baton the police were using to beat him.
Mm.
And this really caused a lot of rage, and there's so much of this going on now. So I just tell people keep smiling, um,
Mm.
even though your heart's broken.
Mm. And it's okay to weep and clench fists, and then and then access joy
Yeah.
again. Like it's possible. Even we have this practice in the Sikh faith. We call it Jadvikal, and maybe this is my answer to your question around whether we live in a friendly universe. I believe that accessing wonder and joy is always available to us. The universe always makes that available to us. And Jardikala, to stay in Jardikala, when two Sikhs greet each other, it's like, are you in Jardikala? Jardikala Vichananda? Like, Jardikala is, it's often translated as eternal optimism, but the deeper meaning is, ever rising spirits, even in darkness, ever rising joy, even in the thick of the labor. Can you smile between the contractions? Can you sink into the beauty and the miracle and the magic of this present moment right here and right now? Can you breathe into that before you then push? That's always available to you. The breath, the wonder, and the feeling of that sparkling energy that we know as joy or Jardikla is always accessible to us, even in the throes of whatever hardship we're inside. So learning how to sink into that as a felt sense in my body and my heart is how I have accessed the love that's available in the universe and the world for myself, so that I can continue to love in my life.
Is it fair to say that your compass points toward a North Star, and that North Star is love and compassion?
Yes, above all.
So that kind of answers the question.
Right?
There ain't no North Star unless there's a North Star.
That's
Yeah, one of my teachers, Joseph Campbell, said, "Joyful participation in the sorrows of the world."
mm, mm, that's it. Mm.
Yeah, and when we bring that smile, and behind the smile is a broken heart. I tell my students, I always ask them at the beginning of the semester, how many of you have ever had a broken heart? They all raise their hands. I
Mm.
said, congratulations, because it's not till your heart is broken that it can grow.
Yeah.
Is that your experience? Broken hearts are not necessarily a bad thing.
I mean, this just happened a few days ago, so it's a funny example, but it feels very real to me right now. When I first walked into this house without my beloved companion, I mean, Shadi was with me every minute of every day. She was our first baby. So to walk into this house without her, every step was survival. Just my body was just convulsing. I was just sobbing, and my heart is broken. My heart is broken without her. And I fell onto the bed, and the voice in me just said, "This is unbearable." And then a wise woman in me said, "Oh, my love, this is transition. You are in transition. You are being changed by this loss, and that you will not be the same on the other side of it." And already, I mean, this house is not the same. This room is not the same. My body is not the same without her little hairs on my pants, or like her sleeping next to me. But it doesn't have to be impoverished, my life, without this loss. In fact, I feel like what she taught me about partnership with non-human beings and the vast, internal consciousness of animals, and how that awareness and that truth of how to see all beings on this earth is actually how we find our way out of this climate crisis, to partner with all of life on earth. Is what I feel like I'm kind of being primed for, having loved her so deeply and felt how shattered I am by her loss, that I am being transformed by it, transitioned by it. So yes, I feel like that broken heart is essential for our growth and for who we are destined to be and what we're destined to do.
It's beautiful. And we've been talking about our relationship with other human beings, and we're just one species. Next 2 million species. And it's a wonderful book. I'm sure you're familiar with Braiding Sweetgrass. And
Yes, it's on my nightstand right now. Oh,
it's
I'm
so
enjoying it
beautiful.
so much.
But she says, no climate change until we can learn to grieve for what we've done to the planet. And, Schopenhauer said, you know who the devil is to animals?
Yeah.
Us. And so maybe that's a big part of revolutionary love is we have to open our hearts not just to the human species, but to something much, much, much larger.
You're a part of me I don't yet know. Can we look on the face of anything, any tree, any plant, any being, any
Yeah.
creature, and say that? And I think maybe what might be helpful is because the climate and the earth, it's so incomprehensible. Like it's just shuts down our ability to bear it. And I think it helps getting really specific on what part of the earth you can truly, truly wonder about. And for me, it has been the sequoias here in
Mhm.
California, Sequoia National Forest. We took my children there last summer and we looked at these trees that were thousands of years old. I mean, as old as like recorded human history. And we were singing the song, You're a part of me I don't yet know.
Mhm.
And just weeks after we had visited, the great KNP complex fire scorched, killed thousands of these trees. And we're at a point in human history where we haven't been before if we're seeing sequoias that are 2,000 years old fall at this level. So to have climate grief, that is rooted in deep recognition and love, and then to say, well, what does this ask of us? What does this demand of me?
Mhm.
How can I fight for and save the dignity of these trees that are left? So I think each of us can find that thing, like, oh, this bird, these cicadas, these flowers, and let that be the heartbreak that allows you to fight for it all and find your particular role in fighting for it all.
Yeah. Well, I see little flies on my window sometimes, and I put my finger up against it. And I guess they like the smell of human flesh because they crawl up onto it long enough that I can take them outside and say goodbye. Because they're traumatized. They see the world out there and they can't get out there.
Get
They're
out.
imprisoned.
Yeah.
So tell us just for a moment about your new book.
It's called, I'm about tomorrow, I head into my a long riding retreat. It's called Sovereign, Letters to a Young Sage Warrior at the End of Our World.
Mm.
That's the working title. I say at the end of our world because the world as we know, we don't live on the planet now that we grew up on. And so the world that must be is a world that is new and a world that we are destined to build, to birth. And the how is what I'm really interested in. So in Sovereign, I'm playing with the concept of the sage warrior, the Sant Sipahi in the Sikh faith. The Sant, the sage, is enamored by the world as it is, just in love with the miracle and magic and wonder of the oneness that always is. The warrior, the Sipahi, labors for the world as it ought to be. That delicious juxtaposition between being in love, ecstatically with the world as it is, and laboring for what it ought to be. How do we move with that in every part of our lives to savor the world and to save the world, to breathe and to push. And I'm interested in exploring what I call sovereignty, that spaciousness inside of us that can observe ourselves in this life as we're making these choices and help us decide now's the time to breathe, now's the time to push, now's the time to get lost in ecstatic wonder, now's the time to warrior. So I'm imagining it as a tapestry of letters that are short and poetic, and that might be kind of like bite-sized medicine for moments when we need it. And again, you write the book you need yourself, right? So this is what I need as I'm laboring with my babies and laboring for the movement and trying to find my sovereignty inside of it and know when to breathe, when to push, when to be sage, when to be warrior.
Absolutely beautiful. And we thank you for sharing the vision of the Charter, which is that compassion and love are the North Star. And
Yes.
and that we're moving in that direction. We're not certainly not there, but we're moving in that direction, and we're laboring. And whether it's we're at 3 centimeters or crowning, I don't know. But my wife used to say 50 years and we'll be there. And I said, maybe a little longer. Um, but we're just so grateful for you and what you're doing. And I will reach out to Trish and your Tracy and your team about the Jesse Lewis project. Uh, Thank you so much for being here with us. And thank you for just being an inspiration to so many thousands, and I'm going to say tens and hundreds of thousands of people, because I saw what you did at the Parliament and you had everybody on their feet. And it really is, as my dissertation advisor, Rick Tarnas, says, it really is a movement of the feminine right now. So, namaste. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gard.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn it back to my sister, Marilyn.
Thank you so much, Valarie. This has been incredible. And to use your words that you shared a couple of times, you've primed us. And you've given us a whole new terminology for Jeanne de Gaulle. And it's something that I think that we can share with one another as we meet enthusiastically. I think the other thing that you gave us today, which is very exciting, is that you're our mentor, but you've also given us permission, I think, to speak a little more directly, with a little bit more force when we see the injustices that surround us. We couldn't be more grateful. And I just want to share with people before we leave that our next global read will be mid-March, March 16th, and it will be with Jacqueline Winspear. For 17 years now, she has given us the New York Times bestseller, the Maisie Dobbs series. And Maisie is that compassionate, knowledgeable, intellectual, challenging human being. And this new book that came out not a couple years ago, actually, is When Faced with Problems, What Would Maisie Do? And so Jacqueline will be joining us. This is a brand new kind of global read for us, but we're very excited about it. Our global read in April is an incredible book of photography and essays by the Dutch photographer Marcel van Osten. And so we hope that you will consider looking at his book, learning about him online. It would be a privilege to own one of these books. It's one of those tabletop books, but it is absolutely gorgeous in celebration of Mother Earth. Please keep up with us with the Charter for Compassion. We have a newsletter that comes out the beginning of every week that gives you details and provides links for the kinds of programming that we do. Another thing is that we also, in addition to global reads, we have global film series. And so our next one is free viewing from February 16th to the 26th, a free trip to Egypt. So you'll find all of the links you need both on our website and in the newsletter. We have for 40 days now, since January 16th, been celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King, but 40 Days of Peace. And I just want to alert you to a couple of the sessions that you might want to participate in. And again, lots of detail on our website, but we have Kosha Anya Jobert from the Pocket Project, Healing the Fractures That Divide Us, coming next week, along with a two-part Saturday presentation with Matt Hayes, February 19th and 26th, Why Martin. Here's a very exciting presentation on what is wrong with me? February 22nd with Dr. Clarence Jones. Dr. Jones was Martin Luther King's lawyer and his speechwriter. And so he will be in conversation with a number of people. And so we really do hope that you'll be able to join us for lessons from my 7.5 years. And then peace literacy will be the following after that. And then Thomas Hubble will be joining us on February 24th, a contribution to the healing of collective trauma of colonialism, racism, and enslavement. We're excited about all of these, but especially excited about Thomas Hubble being a part of this presentation series. And starting at the end of April, we will be working with Thomas in a 10-week program with the Charter for Compassion. And so again, watch your newsletters for dates and times. It's already, I think probably in the next week or two, we have all the outlines ready to go. So you'll be able at least to learn a lot about it, and very possibly to pick up his book, Healing Collective Trauma. So again, thank you so very, very much for attending today, but most importantly, to Valarie and to GARD for helping us really, I think, have a new attitude, an attitude of hope that is exciting. Thank you again.
Thank you, Valarie.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.